On this episode of Connected, we continue our conversation about IT and IoT security, what to do to help prevent it. This and more on Connected.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is Connected, episode 9. Is it secure? Recorded October 19th, 2016.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Connected, Everything IoT. My name is David Danto, your host, and on this week's episode of Connected, we're going to be talking about IoT security Part 2. We had this conversation early on in one of our webcasts, and now we're coming back to talk about what's going on with the Internet of Ransomware things, and a number of security issues that have come out around botnets and insurance companies that are concerned, and a lot of liability. So joining me on my guests, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves again. We have Jason Harris. Jason, tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jason Harris. I'm the managing principal consultant for security in the Americas, and my role is really to help clients understand security architecture, security risks, emerging threats, trends. IoT security is definitely one that's top of mind, and we'll talk a bit more about that in detail later.
Great. And we have Paul Chavez. Paul, can you let everybody know who you work for and what you do?
Sure. My name is Paul Chavez. I work for Harman Professional Solutions, and I'm the Director of Systems Applications, where I work on software development and design as well as technology strategy.
Terrific. Thank you, Paul. And rounding out our panel for this show is Bradford Ben. Needs no introduction, but Bradford, why don't you do it anyway?
Thank you, David. I'm actually going to be wearing two hats today. One hat is I am the self-proclaimed digital janitor and web architect for AVNation and a network nerd. And then during my day job, when I'm not on vacation, I work with Paul at Harman Professional Solutions, where I'm a senior solutions manager specializing in large systems. So I do a lot of networking stuff, both professionally and for fun.
Terrific. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you making the time to have this conversation because I think it's an important one to have. So I was minding my own business, reading the news on one of my smart devices, and all of a sudden I saw a notice come from Johnson & Johnson saying that their insulin pumps are subject to hacking, and users should be aware. Not that if I'm using an insulin pump, I would know what to do to prevent it from being hacked, but that really brought it home for me that we are now surrounded not just by industrial devices in enterprises and organizations, but dozens, if not hundreds, of things in our own home that are connected to the internet, have sensors, have base level operating systems that are probably not very secure, and maybe taking part in a denial of service attack, or maybe subjected to ransomware. Your thermostat sending you reports saying, if you don't pay XYZ, we're going to make your house too hot to live in or too cold to live in. Again, I'm going to ask each of you, but on a scale of I'm making too big a deal out of it to, oh my God, my house is on fire, where really is this threat?
Well, I'll kick off. It's Jason. So sad to say that the threat is real, and we've actually just recently carried out the first instant response, which was for an organization that actually had a denial of service attack that originated, we proved, from IoT devices. So there's no doubt that it's a real threat and it's growing. And in amongst all of our security review work that we're doing for clients, often, almost always, we find that those internet connected smart devices or smart cameras or smart XYZ are running on insecure operating systems and not segregated from the rest of the network. And when you add that to the fact that there's so many people who have these new smart IoT devices in their homes, and they're using their same internet connection to connect back into their company or somebody else's company, we're not making a big enough deal out of it, I think.
Actually, I'm going to agree with Jason on this one, but I'm going to take a slightly different tact because I'm impressed that Jason's actually been retained to take a look at this stuff. I think it is a sky is falling type moment, but I think the sky has been falling for a while, and we've just been kind of digging our head in the sand and ignoring it. To me, one of the challenges is that there's very little review of this technology. So, for instance, I'll use the example of Windows 10 versus Mac versus an insulin pump. Of those three pieces of software, which one do you think has had security analysis done on it? Now, we all pretty much will agree that it's not the insulin pump. But what makes it worse is the fact that under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA, it can actually be deemed illegal for people to start looking at this stuff and publishing the information because it's copyrighted information on the insulin pump. So it's almost as if the companies are purposely keeping us out using DMCA, like John Deere has done and a couple other companies. But then you couple that with the fact of the password's password. It's a very easy device to get into. Almost no one at home knows how to set up their networks, and it becomes a big problem. I don't think it's unstoppable. I think some basic practices of third-party review can help a lot of this. You know, if Johnson and Johnson had said, "We're going to hire a couple of white hats and say, hey, can you take a look at this?" or done it through an external third party, because I know this sounds bad, but working for a company, having an external third party that we hire to look at this stuff and review it means that we get that second set of eyes, but also someone else who might have deeper experience with it. So I do think it's the sky is falling moment. I think the insulin pump is just the tip of the iceberg. It's
Yeah, and I don't want to just throw Johnson and Johnson under the bus. That was just one example that was very widely publicized. Paul, are you going to make this unanimous?
Yeah, well, sort of, except that I'm an optimist. And my take on this is that in some ways, the evolution of this technology, we can't move forward without these sort of bad things happening, and then the whole ecosystem of IoT responding to these bad things happening. It's almost like if we're talking about this medical situation, we've got a virus, and we need to build up our antibodies. I think it's a natural sort of it's a natural occurrence, it's a natural evolution of technology. So I think that these conversations are particularly useful in raising awareness and responding to these problems that are inevitable, I think.
And then after reading that article, and you guys are going to have to help me because I know I'm saying it wrong, I see that there's an Internet of Things botnet out now. Mirai was the name that it was called. What is that, and why is that something that should keep me awake at night?
uh, I'll tell you why it should not keep you awake, but it does keep me awake at night. Uh, so what the Mirai was is actually a pretty smart thing that they've done for bad people. What they've done is a denial of service or distributed denial of service can take a website down or a company down. And what they've done is they've used all these Internet of Things devices that have very simple computers in them and typically don't have their passwords changed to attack a domain just by sending a ping command from, say, 100,000 devices at once, all to the same device, storming that device's connection and its device's power. Uh, from a optimistic standpoint, to quote Paul, I think it's pretty cool that someone figured out how to use the distributed computing. From a can we do this better? Yes, such as making sure that the code gets checked. But what it does is it allows nefarious people to do nefarious things without using their own equipment. Now, this seems like it's a small thing, and as the paranoid person, no, not paranoid, concerned individual, this also comes under Rule 41 that the U.S. Senate's or the U.S. Justice Department's trying to put in of the if your computer is being used in a botnet, they can legally search your computer even though you're an unwilling, complicit person. And that's the part that you should start worrying about is the all of a sudden everything gets tied together and everything's searchable. Some of this stuff is very preventable. The botnets in question, if they had simply changed the administrative password, about half of the bots wouldn't have been used because, to be honest, the hackers were lazy. They send out the what's the default password, stuff answered. And just simply changing that makes it very solvable. To Paul's point, it's solvable. We just have to, as people, take it on as a serious thing.
I was going to say also to my point, though, that the Mirai code apparently has been made public and will be evolving itself and will be becoming more dangerous over time, I think, because initially it's using standard passwords or default passwords to enter into these systems. But who knows now that it's public, who knows how it'll evolve and how much more dangerous it might become.
Well, I want to interject a little bit. Sorry.
No. The question that I was going to ask is that if I'm, a relatively intelligent idiot, and I have, Windows at home, and I'm running, McAfee or Norton antivirus, or I've got a firewall running on the router in my house. Those are things that I knew to take care of. And Jason, as you were talking about, from the enterprise standpoint, we can protect from the attacks. But what can I do as a consumer to take my doorbell that's got video and my light bulb that's on the internet, and how can I prevent this from happening? I don't think there's a way at this point, is there?
Well, there's some pretty obvious things, and that we touched on the point earlier. I mean, I can ask you now a simple question: how many consumers change the default passwords on their Wi-Fi routers? Practically none. Everyone is time constrained, and the more and more technology that goes into houses and into our lives, the less and less likely is it that people will change their passwords from the default. And we just finished up an instant response for a company that was targeted with the Mirai. So they were under attack, saying the distributed denial of service is solvable, but I see this as just another layer of additional complexity that people have got to worry about and try and keep control of. And that applies to to enterprises as well. Okay, so Mr. Overstretched Security Manager, okay, so I've now got to worry about not only my network devices, my operating systems, my applications. I've now got to worry about IoT, and what about all the IoT that's connected to everyone who's connected to my network, which I actually don't quite understand when my network finishes because everything's interconnected.
Yeah, and again, it's scary. I know how to change the default password on the router in my house, and I have, thank goodness. But I don't know how to change the default password on my Nest thermostat, for example, or my connected, mesh network light bulb that talks to the other bulbs and turns on and off. I wouldn't even know how to get into the shell of that and change the default password. And if I did, would it even work anymore? So I'm thinking that I think I read an article last week that the answer is really middleware, that we've got to come back to some level of middleware that comes out there for managing these devices.
Well, actually, I want to jump in a little bit, sir. A couple things. Paul made a statement of the code's out there and people are going to be doing more nefarious things. I agree, but the code's out there, which also means that researchers are sharing how to defeat it, unlike the DMCA where you can't look at it. In terms of the middleware to be able to stop some of this, being the nerd I am, I run a firewall at home that's a little more advanced. It's router based and managed switch based, and I turn off everything inside my house that wants to go outside. And it's a separate network. Now, admittedly, I'm somewhat of a Luddite when it comes to home technology. I don't have IP controlled anything other than my Apple TVs and stuff like that. My doorbell is still analog. My thermostat is analog. My light bulbs are analog. It's one of those things of, with all this technology I deal with every day, being able to come home and simply turn on the switch and not have to worry about some of the security is part of the trade-off.
But Bradford, that's an industry problem. That's exactly what we're talking about. We are out there with ready, fire, aim. We're out there with, hey, consumer, buy all this stuff, and you'll be able to use your smartphone to answer your doorbell so burglars won't know you're not home. And it has to go outside your firewall, otherwise that won't work. And now all of a sudden, you've got a feature design that's insecure.
I'm really vulnerable. I mean, I like to experiment with this stuff. I need to know about this stuff, so I use a lot of I've got basically one of everything, it seems like, in my house. And the one thing I wonder, and I'll put it out to you guys too, because I don't really know the answer, but I wonder if the insurance companies, or if as homes become more vulnerable and maybe infected and um, uh, running these denial of services instances, whether the Verizons and AT&Ts and other cable companies that are providing these services to us will be somewhat more liable because they're the gateways into our homes.
Well,
It's a
that's
good
what
point.
Honestly, they will do their utmost to write that into their contracts that they're not liable. And to your point, bizarrely, as a security professional, I'm actually a Luddite. I don't have any of this smart enabled anything because it's just one more thing for me to worry about. So, okay, so what happens if I have my smart access to my doors, my garage, all these other things, and somebody breaks in through a weakness in that system? Is that wiggle room for the insurance company to turn around and say, well, you weren't diligent enough to ensure that you read this announcement from the company that said you should do something? And that's where we're likely to run into issues, because if there's wiggle room, as we all know, unfortunately, the human trait is people will try and well, that was the reason why it happened. So liability is shifted.
Well, that we
and
just saw a report that I'll share a link with when we put the webcast out, from Swiss Re, that talks about, in the world of the Internet of Things, that there is going to be a tremendous potential liability around all of these things going wrong. And you guys are scaring the death out of me. If we're the technical professionals that understand this stuff, and none of you are using any of this technology because you're afraid of it, what the heck kind of world are we getting into now?
Well, I want to be
Mm.
careful. It's not that I'm afraid of it. I'm lazy. There's a difference. When I come home, I don't want to spend a half an hour getting this all set. Now, I will say there are some companies that are doing some pretty basic but helpful things, such as, and I'm not singling them out, it just happens to be one that I use at home. My Cisco wireless access point and router does not come with a default password. It generates its own when you plug it in and presents it on the screen. So it's not a default password. It's a good step one that they've taken to limit this.
And also
Uh,
Verizon, I use Verizon Fios at home. The Verizon routers that they provide come with a strong, unique password that's not changeable.
right.
So
Well, that's actually a problem that's not changeable.
No doubt, no doubt. If I Google hard enough, I can find a list of those on some unsecure system somewhere.
Yeah. I will say that there are things that we can do. Tim and a couple of the other AVNation people laugh at me that I run a VPN, virtual private network, when I'm in a hotel, just so that way my connection to my servers are relatively secure. I say relatively because nothing's absolute, but little stuff like that, like instead of having a non-VPN gateway out of your house to the big World Wide Web, having a better solution of having a VPN connection out. And so that you have a two-factor authentication, which is the way mine's set up, so you can make it more secure, so that when you want to get in from outside to go change the temperature in your house while you're on vacation, yes, you have to go in and log in, put in your password for your VPN, put in a two-factor authentication code, and then be connected. It's a whole lot easy. That's a lot more secure. And Paul's going to laugh at me because I'm paranoid, but what it means is that
No,
the hackers who are lazy aren't going to get a look in my house. Oh, by the way,
Yeah,
Carol was
unfortunately.
very nice
but
today.
you bring up a great point that I wanted to bring up here, which is that good security today means terrible user experience,
Mm.
and that there's this trade-off that we as technology people kind of feel like we have to give up user experience to get security, and I really don't believe that. I think that ultimately, I think the onus is on the manufacturers to make these systems secure and usable, and that's a huge challenge. But we have to keep both in mind, because what Bradford just described sounds like a nightmare to me.
And I'll agree with you, Paul. And sorry, Jason, to cut you off. There are things we can do to make this better. I'm using a VPN that's not certificate based or hardware based, so I can use it from any computer as long as I know my credentials. You could go in and do MAC address filtering, which I'll pretend can't be spoofed, but we all know better. You can do a certificate with two-factor authentication, which is what some of the VPNs do. Of here's a 256-bit word that's on your computer, it's going to match up against ours. There are ways to improve the user experience. For me, it was the other features were worth the trade-off, but I'm a nerd.
All right, but guys, I'm going to ask the question again from a commercial standpoint. Why isn't XYZ company that makes doorbells or light bulbs that are connected to the Internet of Things putting themselves out, yeah, we cost $30 more, but ours are secure? Why isn't security and protection a feature in the consumer's minds or in the manufacturer's minds?
I'll take my guess. A couple things. One, the consumers are resigned to it and aren't willing to put the investment in. To Paul's point, they'll make the trade-off of the user experience is such that I just want something simple, and there are 300 million people. What are the odds of me being hit? And I have insurance against identity theft and all these other things. So I think there's a portion of that, but I also think there's the other part, which is, there's no incentive for the company to do it. I wonder, and this is pure conjecture, if I say I'm secure and this is 256-bit encryption and blah, 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 will the insurance company, when something happens, say, well, this company is liable because they provided a security that's not really there? And I wonder if that's part of the game. And to be honest, it's price driven. If I can spend $5 for a doorbell, I will.
Yeah, I also think. Sorry.
Go ahead, Paul. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think that one of the reasons why people aren't willing to pay is because there hasn't been enough publicity towards failures. When we start seeing people really suffer because of this in the public, on the news, and that sort of thing, then people will be able to be willing to pay more. But really, right now, these articles that you sent to me, that we looked at prior to this, they're still fairly low key and underground. All of this information is still not like massively public as it needs to be.
And also, David, I want to put your mind at rest. Sorry, Jason, you're never going to talk. You made the mistake having me and Paul on. But I want to put your mind a little bit at rest and make you nervous all at the same time. The bigger thing with ransomware and IoT is not the house, it's the business. There was a hospital in California that got held for ransomware of you want into your operating system, you will pay us X thousands of dollars. And I think that's the bigger challenge first, and because those are the deeper pockets of the system.
So Jason,
we're dealing with, I'd say, probably one of those kind of instances for enterprises a month now.
Jason, if the risk is to the enterprise from like the DDoS attack, is there something that the enterprises can do to help influence the market so that these weak, awful points of failure are not as prevalent?
I think that's going to be tough, but really what we need to be influencing, and certainly what we're doing, is most organizations, most enterprises just need to raise the level of security maturity, full stop, exclamation mark, because at the moment they're not. So this is just like an additional layer of threat and risk on top of everything else. And that's the core thing really is, it's almost like the straw that breaks the camel's back. There's all these existing threats, there's all these existing systems that aren't secure, that their IT is really struggling to keep up with, keep up with the patch cycle, application testing, application security testing, blah, 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 blah. All these different vendors that are connecting to their systems, et cetera, et cetera. And then you just say, oh, and by the way, you now got to worry about IoT, not only in your own environment, but in the environment of all the users that are connected to your environment, and all of those companies, all of those users for the third parties that are connected to your network. So we still go back to let's start at the core and work our way out. I don't think there's going to be able to influence external organizations too much. Certainly in healthcare and industrial control systems, yeah, absolutely. They industry standards and compliance pressures are doing that already. But for all these myriad of consumer-based IoT, that
There
falls
are no
well
standards.
without, no,
Yeah,
that's
the problem.
way, way,
There are
way,
no standards.
yeah. I do think though that I did my insurance. I'm moving house, so I had to do I'm moving to a new house and I want my new cover. I do think now though it won't be long before there's some tick boxes for do you have a smart this, do you have a smart that, which manufacturer do you have, and that could, and I believe that will start to influence your insurance, your insurance premium based on risk analysis. Financial risk analysis, not security so much.
So put in the better device because the better device gets you a lower insurance cost.
Or if you have no device, like Bradford and I, by the sound of it, hey, you're a lower risk because actually, you have to use a key to get into your house.
Interesting. All right, so I'm going to give each of you one more shot to give us the last word and your thoughts on this. Bradford, why don't we start with you? Tell everybody, sum up your thoughts here, but also tell everybody how they can get in touch with you if you want, if you even want people to get in touch with you after this show.
No, I always enjoy talking with people. So you can reach out to me at bradfordben.com, at bradfordben, at Harman during my day job. I'm bradford.ben at harman.com with 2 N's. At AVNation, if you send something to webmaster at AVNation or Bradford at AVNation, I'll get it. If you Google me and you can't find me, it means my job's not being done right. I will say, don't stress. We are the low priority targets. If I was Citibank or a hospital, I would stress.
Okay, Paul, you?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of benefit to some of these devices that are coming out. I think that it is wise to kind of look one level deeper into the security of any given device. You have a lot of choices these days. Some are more secure than others. So I think before you choose, do some more additional research. I can be reached at paul.chavez@harman.com or on Twitter at PMC Waterrock with 2 R's. I'd be glad to talk to anybody.
Terrific, thank you. And Jason, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm kind of doing 2 things in parallel. One is every single normal consumer that I speak to, constantly trying to educate them on these are the new things that are happening and the new ways that you need to be thinking about your own security. And obviously from a commercial perspective, it's just business as usual. It's just another threat, although it's adding more complexity. So I can be reached at jason.harris@dimensiondata.com or on Twitter at jasonh66.
Jason, Paul, and Bradford, thank you very much for having this conversation with us. I'm still scared. I don't know if I'm going to put in that electronic doorbell next time. My name is David Danto. I appreciate you all joining us for this episode of Connected, the Internet of Things, and we look forward to seeing you on our next show. Thanks very much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, David.